The neuroscience community is gradually waking up more and more regarding the fact that there might be more to our brainwaves frequency that we have been led on. Some of the most recent scientific findings, for example, regarding our brainwaves, show that there seems to be an orchestration of some sort when it comes to different brainwaves frequencies and our brain functions. Some of these studies we have covered extensively, and beta waves frequency appear to be one of those leading brain waves that appear to have a lot to do with our brain functions, where it somehow orchestrates, synchronizes, and works with the spikes and the different activities of the neurons, for example, when they start firing. Now, traditionally, beta brain waves have been correlated with our motor functions, the way we move, for example. This is one of the reasons in Parkinson's disease, the motor functions are out of balance, and we've noticed that the beta waves frequencies are also somehow out of balance. Beta waves frequency have also been connected with working memory, for example, something that we have covered extensively here, but also, for example, cognition as well as emotions. On the other hand, dopamine, one of our leading neurotransmitters, have also been connected with specifically midbrain activities as well as movements and motor functions. We have years and decades of research regarding dopamine activities or dopamine, the role of dopamine in our motor functions, for example, among others. But now the question is, could there be a connection between beta brainwaves frequencies and dopamine, since both appear to somehow, at least one of their roles, be the motor functions and the way in which we move, and the regions of the brain specifically that has to do with motor movement. The hypothesis of this study that we will be covering today did just that. There is not a whole lot of research studies that connect or has been connecting neurotransmitter with brainwaves frequencies. So covering this study is extra exciting because this is one of those baby steps that we've been talking about, where we are connecting the physical brain with the non-physical brain. In this case, the physical brain is not only the firing of the neurons, but in actuality is the neurotransmitter, the chemical responses of the brain with the non-physical brain, which in this case is the beta waves frequencies. For this particular study, these research scientists focused on the subcortical, cortico-subcortical region of the brain. Why did they do that? One of the reasons is that within the subcortical region of the brain, aka the midbrain, we have the limbic system, basal ganglia, thalamus, etc. Here is where the dopamine plays a lot of role. There's a lot of dopamine neurotransmitter that are being released. So is the beta waves frequencies. If you remember in the past, we mentioned that gamma waves, which are higher in frequencies, appear to be more on the surface, but the deeper we go within the brain, then we have these slower and slower frequencies that are happening. Another reason that they focus on this part of the midbrain of the brain is because there is a lot going on here. There's a lot of functionalities that is happening here, one of which is, for example, movement, but also a lot of hormones are being regulated here. And so for that reason, among other reasons, this part of the brain was focused. And as you already know, when we do research studies, we do need to be very focused. We cannot be too general when we do scientific studies because we need to control for each of these variables. Another reason these research scientists focused on beta brainwave frequencies, dopamine, as well as the region of the subcortical part of the brain is that studies have shown that beta brainwaves frequencies is very correlated with our sensory motor cortex. The same can be said with dopamine. And so for that reason, the conclusion would be that, hey, should we look at the possible correlation and or combination among these three pieces of information that we have? Another reason for beta frequencies to be so important is that it appears that beta waves frequencies, first of all, when we categorize them, the frequencies are very large. So you can basically say low beta, mid beta, and higher beta because the number of frequencies within that category is extremely large. Another reason is that beta is one of the most common, so to speak, waves frequency that we can detect and cover. Even in my own lab, when I was doing my own studies, beta was always more present than, for example, gamma or alpha. Gamma is higher frequencies and alpha is much lower, but because beta is sort of in the middle, for some reason, it just kept coming up. And the same reason can be said for this particular study because it's extremely widespread. So as a result, it becomes one of those phenomena that you do want to focus on, because when the brain does something more than the others, you know that there is an important reason for that. Now, the hypothesis for this particular study was that the beta brainwaves frequencies is a synchronization phenomena that has to do with the whole brain networks within the subcortical nuclei and part of a region of the brain that is primarily modulated by dopamine. And it turns out that their hypothesis was correct. There appears to be this beta waves frequency that essentially synchronize the neural activities within parts of the midbrain sections and regions of the brain that is being modulated by dopamine. So dopamine is modulating the midbrain, and then the beta brainwaves frequencies is synchronizing or orchestrating those neural activities within the subcortical regions of the brain. In other words, beta waves frequencies is no longer specific to a domain. Its functionality is not limited to a specific domain, but a whole brain network where it synchronizes the whole circuit of the brain networks. And it says here, and I quote, beta is an activity generated by a brain network that is modulated by the domain. So this part is extremely exciting and interesting because it paves the way for us to figure out more and more about what these brain waves frequencies do, and appears that they are absolutely synchronizing and connecting different brain regions, also with the way in which they help the communication going on. When it comes to the beta brainwaves frequency, there also appear to be a status quo hypothesis. The status quo hypothesis essentially means that beta waves frequency send signal to the whole brain to give it cue whether a cognitive function needs to be changed or a motor function needs to be changed. And again, this is extremely exciting because it goes to show that the brainwaves frequency appear to work on the holistic part of the brain and not just the regions. In this case, the status quo role and responsibility of the brainwaves, telling the brain what to do and whether things should need to be changed or what the status of the brain is, essentially. These scientists noticed that when the beta brainwaves frequencies increased, the neural dynamics remained unchanged. But when beta waves frequency decreased, then it gave the cue that the neural dynamics needs to change. There is something with the motor function or cognitive functions that needed to change. Hence, that is how the beta waves appear to communicate the status quo hypothesis with it. While many of the brain functions can be summarized and put under the umbrella of the status quo hypothesis, with beta waves frequencies, there are still other brain functions such as regulations of emotions, processing memory at a deeper level, etc., that are still being investigated because we still have a lot to learn about how our brain waves frequencies work with our physical brain. And so this is again another baby steps that we are taking and moving forward in the body of knowledge of neuroscience community.